The sound of silence. Former Attorney General Jody Wilson-Raybould's resignation and virtual silence regarding allegations that she was pressured to make a deal with SNC-Lavalin, the Quebec construction giant facing fraud and bribery charges, has become a deafening political roar across Canada. Lots of questions here. Why won't the Prime Minister waive solicitor-client privilege that would allow her to speak? Why did she resign? And will the Liberal-controlled investigation, quote-unquote, really get any answers? Was the government actually trying to help the multi-billion-dollar Quebec construction company avoid a criminal trial? Let's bring in the Scrum to sort all this out in a couple minutes. Tonda McCharles, senior reporter for the Toronto Star, is here. Joyce Napier, CTV's Ottawa bureau chief, is here. Craig Oliver, our Cub reporter, also known as our chief political commentator. And our special guest today is the former Justice Minister, Attorney General, Peter MacKay. Good morning to everybody. This is a heck of a week.
Good morning.
Peter MacKay, I'll start with you. What did you make of the Liberal-controlled Justice Committee investigation that supports an investigation as long as they don't call Jody Wilson-Raybould and other key members of the Prime Minister's office to testify? What do you make of that?
Well, it's a sham investigation, but to pick up on your theme about silence being golden, I have kids, and when I hear silence, I'm suspicious, and I think that's the same theme here. You know, what we really need to hear from is Jody Wilson-Raybould. She is at the heart of this. To not have her appear at the committee, to not have Gerald Butts, to not have people in the Prime Minister's office is the same as if it was a Sesame Street episode. It's not going to do anything to inform anybody about these critically important matters. And that is, was there interference in the administration of justice through the minister's office right down to the director of public prosecutions? That is a massively important question and goes to the fundamentals and shakes the foundation of the rule of law in Canada.
On the Liberal-dominated Justice Committee, when you set up a firing squad, you don't have to tell them what the objective is. They knew what the government wanted. The government wanted the thing shut down with as much subtlety as possible, but they weren't very subtle.
Subtlety of a sledgehammer.
Yeah.
Really.
What do you make of it?
The Prime Minister is still navigating his way very carefully through this and not doing a very good job of it. And at the end of the week, we saw him essentially confirm that Wilson-Raybould felt it necessary to ask him, given the full court press that was on from Quebec, MPs, unions, the company, everybody, are you directing me? Are you going to direct me in this case? So we don't know what prompted that. What did the Prime Minister say to her? Was that the pressure she apparently, according to the report in the Globe, later felt?
And that's, Joyce, it hinges on this, right? Yes. What is, the Liberals are saying it's all just cabinet robust discussion, and some people suggesting it's pressure. It seems to hinge, is it going to hinge on what's pressure and what's discussion?
What we are all doing, all of us, is waiting for Jody Wilson-Raybould to speak up. And she's not talking. So basically, this is a woman who's told her boss, take this job and shove it.
On Friday, the Prime Minister, I think for the first time, admitted that in the conversations they talked a lot about saving jobs. And I'm presuming he means saving jobs in Quebec. So how should
only in Quebec.
Right, but saving jobs. So how could anybody have any doubt that he wasn't getting what he wanted from his justice minister?
We have a justice minister.
And so he fired her for that reason, for a justice minister from the province of Quebec. Let me just bring
Peter MacKay, because you're a former justice minister, and maybe you can shed light on this. When you were in cabinet and they had cabinet discussions, how did you avoid, and you're participating, what should we do about SNC-Lavalin? That's your hat as a cabinet minister. Where did you separate that, the Prime Minister's thoughts on something, when you had to then make an independent decision as an Attorney General?
Well, there's nothing analogous during my time, but let me add quickly that there was a conscious decision taken by our government to pull out the Director of Public Prosecution's office from the Department of Justice. That is to say, to make it more accountable and more arm's length. There's also a provision, coming back to what Craig just said, that deals specifically with the jobs, the economics, not being a consideration when it comes to these decisions around deferred prosecutions or remediation agreements. And so for the Director of Public Prosecutions, that pressure was not to be brought to bear, which is perhaps why the company went to the PMO and to the Justice Minister to apply the pressure further up. But again, come back to this issue of what constitutes pressure. Where was it coming from? The fact that the Prime Minister is now talking about this and characterizing it in a certain way and reciting certain parts of conversations implicitly waives privilege. And it's his privilege to waive, importantly. Let's be clear. This is not on Jody Wilson-Raybould. He can and should waive privilege, given that he's only given snippets of those conversations.
Yeah, by the way, that's key. So Peter MacKay's argument is that that by the Prime Minister spoke about this, David Lametti, the Justice Minister, spoken about this on this program, and that he may have implicitly already waived solicitor-client privilege.
And he may have. There are different opinions on that, actually, but yes, and that may be true. But look, just to look at the pressure and where it was coming from, it wasn't just coming from the company itself and all the lobbyists. I reported this week that Legault actually met and privately made this case to Trudeau in 3 separate meetings. And the meetings were right around, one of them was right that week when the public prosecutor said, no, we're not going to do a deal. That was when Trudeau and Legault were in Armenia. Right. And those meetings, he did it again in December, he did it again in January. Legault did behind the scenes with Trudeau, saying, look, get this resolved. We need to settle this. Settle it as quickly as possible. He won't say what Mr. Trudeau said in response, but there's no question that this was coming from all quarters. So is that pressure? Is that pressure on the government? Is that pressure the government felt and transmitted to Jody Wilson-Raybould?
But again, we're speculating
we are speculating.
Because Legault's predecessor, Philippe Couillard, same thing. Also, there was political pressure on the on the Prime Minister's office, and you saw the list of ministers that were lobbied and that were pressured. So was there pressure? We can probably say for sure, yes, there was. So the question is, was it undue pressure on the Attorney General?
And I think those are fair points, Craig. There's another political element. As we talk about, is there pressure? And that's part of what's driving this. But what's underneath it is we've exposed how extensive the lobbying by SNC-Lavalin is, the kind of access they had, and it's raised the question for the Trudeau brand, which is supposed to be the middle class, is SNC-Lavalin an insider that is, quote, too big to jail, so they get a kind of a cut of a new deal?
It's too big to nail, too. It's too big to nail. And are there good politics in the province of Quebec to be seen to be saving private company Lavalin?
Peter MacKay, I mean, I think this is a new tool.
There were 2 distinct periods in time here. There was the lobbying that went on to get the new legislation in place. But what's more problematic is after it's in place, and particularly after the Director of Public Prosecution sometime in October said, no, you don't qualify, then it intensified. Others have said that the Premier was involved, and there were certainly all kinds of representations made by SNC. But what we know importantly is that the Minister resisted, as did the Director of Public Prosecution. And what happened? She was demoted.
We don't have. We don't have any evidence that the Prime Minister or any other minister spoke to Jody Wilson-Raybould about this after September 17th. That's the only conversation we are directly aware of.
If she would actually speak, we could find more of those answers. Last question to you, Joyce. This is playing out in English Canada and in Quebec in a very different way. In English Canada, how did you give SNC-Lavalin this deal? Did you pressure her to do this? In Quebec, it's very different. Does this pose a political problem for Justin Trudeau? Quebec being a vital place for his election hopes, and if you throw SNC-Lavalin under the bus there, does that have a political consequence? So is he weighing those 2 forces?
Of course it has a political consequence. There are jobs at play, and this is SNC-Lavalin. I mean, it's one of the biggest Canadian companies, not a Quebec company. This is a Canadian company.
It's like the Huawei of Quebec.
It is. It is huge. It is too big to fail. That is the problem for them. Do they have a lot to lose in Quebec? Absolutely. But so would the Conservatives have. If this was a Conservative Prime Minister, I think the stakes would be just as high.
Which is why Scheer won't say where he stood on
I mean, it is, and I'm sure that Peter MacKay understands that.
Okay, last word to Peter MacKay.
There's a bigger problem here. There's a bigger problem that goes well beyond Quebec, and that is that she was a female Aboriginal minister who looks as if she was treated badly, is now being badmouthed and slandered around town and around the country, was criticized after the fact. I think this has a bigger brand problem from the Liberal Party, who very much had her as the face of everything that they embody as a party.
And on Friday, the Prime Minister fell over himself trying to explain away and regret all that awful innuendo.